Welcome, friends. Today's talk is on the path of progress. Next week, the power of a vow. Washington, D.C. area students of Pure Theosophy meet here at 4865A Cordell Avenue, Suite 230, Bethesda, Maryland, zip 20814, every Sunday in an effort to better understand the life to be lived while we're here on this earth. We then go out to practice self-development aimed at making ourselves better able to help and teach others. These videos are being made to reach those unable to attend. If you can attend, you are invited to come and be with us to help do our part to make this philosophy available locally for those who are ready, as the masters of wisdom keep it alive in the world, no matter how much they and their program may be invisible to the masses. We meet here every Sunday at 11 a.m. Every first and third Sunday of each month, we reconvene at 12:30 p.m. for roundtable readings and discussions. We are currently studying the Bhagavad Gita in the afternoons and the related notes. We follow the declaration of the United Lodge of Theosophists. It says, "The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of Theosophy, without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of Theosophy and the exemplification and practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among Theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis. And it aims to disseminate this idea among Theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as Theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization, and it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves, by study and otherwise, to be the better able to help and teach others. The true Theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all." The form signed by associates of the United Lodge of Theosophists says, "Being in sympathy with the purposes of this lodge as set forth in its declaration, I hereby record my desire to be enrolled as an associate, it being understood that such association calls for no obligation on my part other than that which I myself determine." Today's reading is from The Voice of the Silence, starting on page 18. And it says, "Long weary Long and weary is the way before thee, O disciple. One single thought about the past that thou hast left behind will drag thee down, and thou wilt have to start to climb anew. Kill in thyself all memory of past experiences. Look not behind, or thou art lost. Do not believe that lust can ever be killed out if gratified or satiated, for this is an abomination inspired by Mara. It is by feeding vice that it expands and waxes strong, like the worm that fattens on the blossom's heart. The rose must re-become the bud born of its parent stem before the parasite has eaten through its heart and drunk its life sap. The golden tree puts forth its jewel buds before its trunk is withered by the storm. The pupil must regain the child state he has lost ere the first sound can fall upon his ear. The light from the one master, the one unfading golden light of spirit, shoots its effulgent beams on the disciple from the very first. Its rays thread through the dark, thick clouds of matter. Now here, now there, these rays illuminate. Like sun sparks light the earth through the thick foliage of the jungle growth. But, O disciple, unless the flesh is passive, head cool, the soul is firm and pure as flaming diamond, the radiance will not reach the chamber. Its sunlight will not warm the heart, nor will the mystic sounds of the Akashic lights reach the ear, however eager at the initial stage. Unless thou hearest, thou canst not see. Unless thou seest, thou canst not hear. To hear and see, this is the second stage. And now for today's talk.
Good morning and welcome, friends. Today's talk is on the path of progress, as stated before, but what does that really mean? Well, we live in the West, and the West considers mechanical, scientific progress as a forerunner of everything else. But in this program, we shall find out what is meant by that statement. So this material progress is very evident when you look around. People are very materialistic in this age, and society has turned its eye towards wealth, power, position, and social status. Master of wisdom, however, care only for spiritual progress, for the awakenings of the soul to the light of its own divine nature. Just as we just read in the Voice of the Silence, that divine nature is there, but we have to be awakened to it and cultivate it. It is true that Theosophy speaks of 3 lines of evolution: physical, intellectual, and spiritual. The first 2, which is physical and intellectual, has their own place in the scheme of things, but their importance comes by providing avenues of experience for the moral growth to be accomplished. So, we're talking about spiritual progress. And the 2, intellectual and physical, has to be worked with to provide experience for our moral growth. So when we look around, we see that we have boats, we have aeroplanes, television, radar, cell phones. What are those? Well, they're permutations of matter. What do they occupy? Do they occupy? Our psychic nature. They're there because we get some kind of intellectual and psychic comfort from these things, and that's why they're there. But what does that do if we're continuously concentrated on those things? What does that do to us? Well, according to this philosophy, it delays the progression of our soul nature, because we're so occupied with the material things in our life, we don't pay much attention to the spiritual. So, telescopes are built to look into the far reaches of space. What kind of space? Physical. This is just on the physical plane. And then, of course, we have microscopes, very powerful ones, and we're looking deeper and deeper into the mysteries of the very small, infinitesimal lives that compose our bodies, and obviously all our other aspects as well. So meticulous observation is definitely part of our scientific setup today. And so they're now kind of endlessly looking at the attitude and behavior of the atom. They're observing it. So if we had to list all these achievements of science, indeed, it is great. We have done tremendous work in that direction, all on the physical plane. So what value does it have? We have to ask these questions, each one for ourselves. What value does all these intentions of science possess of themselves? And the masters say, of itself, nothing. Itself, of itself, nothing. For the real value of anything must be in the extent to which it furthers, either directly or indirectly, the progressive awakenings of the soul. Because we know, we have read it in the Gita, we have read it in the voice, Dhammapada, that all that exists for the sake of the soul's experience and emancipation. So of itself then, these progressive stages in the material world does not mean anything if they do not enable us through experience to obtain that very necessary moral progression towards our spiritual nature. So from what we just said, it does not mean that Theosophy is quarreling with science. It has no quarrel with it. Neither it denies or belittles the achievements of our modern age. On the contrary, it holds that they are marvelous and stupendous, and sometimes awe-inspiring. So, how could they do anything else, we should ask? Because these things all appeal to our senses and to the reasonings of our physical brain mind. Senses and physical brain mind. Remembering that the brain is the tool of the mind. Mind uses the brain to obtain information from the physical world, and the soul uses the mind, of course. So, in the future, of course, we're going to get a lot more accomplishments in that direction through research and experimentation. However, real progress, in order to come about from this endeavor, is how we look at the broader scheme. Do we look at these things as an end or otherwise? And the writings state that these patterns are of illusion, and they will intrigue the intellect and divert the energies of the aspiring man into incidental importance, while the path of real progress remains untrod. Such is the lure of Maya. Why do we call it illusion? Maya is illusion. Because, as we all know, in the physical world, everything is there for our experience, but it constantly changes. Nothing is permanent. The internal man, the soul, the spirit entity, is permanent. That's the only permanent aspect of us that is. But our world, we are told in the Secret Doctrine and all the other writings, is myopic, because it has a beginning and it will have an end. Now, it is not the dogmatic philosophy here we are referring to. We are referring to the Mahamanvantara, and we're talking about trillions of years. The Mahamanvantara is a very long period of time, and the yugas, or the smaller circles in it, are there. Now, where are we in this plan? This is Kali Yuga, where everything is very fast. And I'm putting this as a reference so that we know where we are. We, as humanity on Earth today, we are the 5th subrace of the 5th root, the Aryan race. 5th root. So, in order to get to reality, this is what we have to do: cultivate the inner side of our nature. Reality, theosophically speaking, does not lie in the realm of the objective world, and it is not discovered by mechanized extensions of our physical senses. True progress requires the development of our spiritual faculties. What did we just read in the voice of the silence? That we have to reach the child state, and each one of us needs to figure that out for themselves as to what that really means. What is a child state, and what does it signify for each one of us? In a previous talk, there was a discussion about the stages a baby goes through from birth into adulthood, as to how the body changes every 7 years and how our psychic nature changes with it. But the problem with that is that sometimes, even though the body is growing, the psychic nature does not keep up with the growth, and it gets stuck somewhere, and the intellectual mind is continuously revolving around whatever the person is stuck on. And we went through those phases. So, we have to keep all of that in mind, because we can only address these talks from one perspective. But when you think about it, it has many, many perspectives, because we have 7 sheaths and 7 levels of consciousness, and we need to correlate them for ourselves. So true progress then requires the spiritual faculties to be developed. But first, we have to admit that we have them, and then we have to go about trying to understand what they are. Without that first step of admitting that we have them, we won't be able to develop them. Admitting it comes first. admittance. We have to admit that they are there. Just because we don't see it, it doesn't mean that they are not there. Why don't we see it? We only see the physical body because the rest of us is invisible. It's invisible because its constitution is not physical. It's superphysical, if you like, or supersensuous, I should say. So it's there, but it's not visible. So how are we to accomplish this progress of our spiritual faculties? How is this task to be accomplished? Since it says a higher than usual consciousness must be evoked. We have to evoke a higher consciousness in ourselves. Such progress does take place, and it is evidenced by the growing respect for spiritual laws of morality. When you look around the world, there are those individuals that are coming forward, and sometimes they're proteges, but nevertheless, the moral nature is so advanced, their concern is to do what they're doing in service to humanity, and they are around, and they're increasing in number. But even in ordinary life, we can see that progress is taking place because we do not exclusively rely on jurisprudence, but we do have appreciation in many, many quarters for simple natural things of life, instead of that insatiable desire for change and complexity by an ever-widening perception of the inner nature of things, in place of fixations on the objective forms of matter. Because a lot of people are fixed on objective forms of matter, but the cultivation of the soul, nevertheless, is going on, because what movement came out recently? Minimalism. So we are not all going towards bigger and greater things, because that will not achieve it. We have to understand that our nature is simple. Simple. We need certain things to live by, but a lot of it is not necessary. When we take more, it means we are taking someone else's share. So the spiritual evolution, of course, as we know, cannot be sponsored by our intellect. However, the intellect can and should put the house in order, providing the divine ego with a proper environment of idea and a control power of concentration, through which the soul may experience and grow. And we give talks on these subjects all the time. One of them is learning to be quiet, because this is a chatterbox society we live in. Everything is done by constantly talking. We have to learn to go back to the quietude of the olden days. We need to consciously make that effort to be quiet, because it is necessary in order to learn to apply concentration, which is here very elemental to the cultivation of the inner life. Control power of concentration means meditation, that we can hold the mind on whatever particular object or subject we choose to put it on, and retain it there as long as we wish. And many of us cannot do it. Actually, we had students come here from the Indian culture telling us that we should let the mind just roam free because it cannot be controlled. Now, that is a false statement, because in the Gita we have read that Arjuna is saying to Krishna, the mind is like the wind. It goes from one thing to another freely. And Krishna says, yes, it is very difficult to control it, but nevertheless, with effort and detachment, it can be achieved. So, we do have these writings that give us guidance as to in which direction and how we should go. What's the other one? divine ego with proper environment of idea. What is Theosophy? It's an ideal that is internal, and it is constantly kept at the forefront of that neophyte who is trying to get on the path. What is the idea? The idea is the world of consciousness that relates to the Buddhic plane. Because in many places, HPB writes that when we are dealing with ideas, we know what the resolution or solution to the problem is. And when we bring it down, we can interject it into our suggestion as to what needs to be done for that particular purpose in that particular time and space. So the ideal world, then, we can contact when we have achieved that quietude, which is very necessary for the soul life. In the East, and fortunately for us also in London, there are centers now where they're teaching very young children to sit quietly and imbibe their souls. These are 3-4 years old who are also learning Sanskrit. So our mind is definitely turning towards the spiritual growth because it is a necessary aspect of our lives in this era. Why? Because we have reached the midpoint of development, and now we are circling towards spirituality. Where is that going to take us, that turning round? Coming down, we immersed into substance or materiality. But going up towards our spiritual centers we came from, requires different aspects of our lives to be developed, because etherealization is definitely going to take place. The foremost purpose of Blavatsky's mission was to unite the Buddhi and Manas of the race. She had something particular in mind to do when she came. She didn't get any assistance from many people, but she did achieve it. She crushed the Victorian age mindset. She introduced all these new ideas into our minds, and she was very successful in it. Herb. Where is the race mind today? Kamamanas. Kamamanas. This is personality oriented. This is repeated a lot, but everyone needs to internalize these terms. This is desire oriented. Buddhi is a spiritual discernment or soul, a spiritual soul as well as a spiritual discernment. So here she is trying to uplift humanity from the kamic desire oriented mind, which is intellectual, to our spiritual aspect, higher mind and a spiritual soul combination. She had something very definite in mind, and she did achieve it. And this was going on when great sifting in the Theosophical movement was going on too. What did it do? It kind of germinated a lot of stuff while she was on earth. People were attracted to it, to the philosophy, but I'm not sure they understood the significance of what was being said, that the Theosophical movement was not there to provide psychic food to those who were looking for it, but rather to awaken the truth that had been suppressed for so many, many centuries and hold it going. In other words, not let that torch go out, torch of truth go out. And this is a direct quote from her. She said that she would die happily if she could succeed in placing on the right path half a dozen or so real theosophies. Real theosophies. That's her statement. Real theosophies. And we need to then learn how to differentiate what she means by real theosophies and those people who claim to be such. Most of us are theosophical students in this age. To become real theosophists is a different thing altogether. And she says, for these could and would become leaders. What kind of leaders do we need? In other words, well, obviously those who care for humanity's welfare in the future, and they will do their utmost best for the progression of humanity forward, and those real theosophies in key positions and key locations are needed. So we will go to the secret doctrine. These passages were selected to free the mind from misconceptions, because a lot of students have a lot of misconceptions about theosophy. The real progress is that which is accomplished within man himself through changes in states of consciousness which he alone can effect. So here it is, our work listed for us. If we have time, we'll read all of them. If not, we'll give the references. So this progress is achieved within man himself. No one can put this wisdom into us from the outside. We can get help, but the work has to be done by each individual soul, and everyone else is obligated to help move it along. This is from the secret doctrine. Maya or illusion is an element which enters into all finite things. For everything that exists has only a relative, not an absolute reality, since the appearance which the hidden noumenon assumes for any observer depends upon his power of cognition. Noumenon is what is behind the phenomenal. In other words, our world is phenomenal, but what holds it together is the noumenon behind it, which is invisible. To the untrained eye of the savage, a painting is at first an unmeaning confusion of streaks and dots of color, while an educated eye sees instantly a face or a landscape. Nothing is permanent except the hidden one, absolute existence, which contains in itself the noumena of all realities. The existences belonging to every plane of being, to the highest Dayan Shohans, are in degree of the nature of shadows cast by a magic lantern on a colorless screen. But all things are relatively real, for the cognizer is also a reflection, and the things cognized are therefore as real to him as himself. Whatever reality things possess must be looked for in them before or after they have passed like a flash through the material world. But we cannot cognize any such existence directly, so long as we have sense instruments, which bring only material existence into the field of our consciousness. Whatever plane our consciousness may be acting in, both we and the things belonging to that plane are, for the time being, our only realities. As we rise in the scale of development, we perceive that during the stages through which we have passed, we mistook shadows for realities, and the upward progress of the ego is a series of progressive awakenings, each at once bringing with it the idea that now at last we have reached reality. But only when we have reached the absolute consciousness and blended our own with it shall we be free from the delusions produced by Maya. This is not an easy thing to obviously accomplish, but she is well aware of it. However, if we do not make an effort, a start, we will never get there. So it's important to start it. This was Secret Doctrine 1, page 39. Time is only an illusion produced by the succession of our states of consciousness as we travel through eternal duration, and it does not exist where no consciousness exists in which the illusion can be produced. Secret Doctrine 1, 37. Our ideas, in short, on duration and time are all derived from our sensations according to the laws of association. Inextricably bound up with the reality of human knowledge, they nevertheless can have no existence except in the experience of the individual ego, and perish when its evolutionary march dispels the Maya of phenomenal existence. Time, for instance, is a panoramic succession of our states of consciousness, and the master makes this statement, quote, "I feel irritated at having to use these three clumsy words, past, present, and future, miserable concepts of the objective phases of the subjective whole. They are about as ill adapted for the purpose as an axe for fine carving." When therefore the Secret Doctrine, postulating that conditioned or limited space, in other words location, has no real being except in this world of illusion, or in other words, in our perceptive faculties, teaches that every one of the higher as of the lower world is interblended with our own objective world. That millions of things and beings are in point of localization around and in us, as we are around, with, and in them. It is no metaphysical figure of speech, but a sober fact in nature, however incomprehensible to our senses. So, we don't see anything in this room, but if your inner eye is open, you would be able to see other things as well as the physical. So this is what she is encouraging us to do, to develop our inner faculties, the spiritual ones, not just sense perception, but the inner perception would add other dimensions to our perceptive faculties. Nothing is added to darkness to make of it light, or to light to make it darkness on this our plane. They are interchangeable, and scientifically light is but a mode of darkness and vice versa. Yet both are phenomena of the same noumenon, which is absolute darkness to the scientific mind, and but a great twilight to the perception of the average mystic, though to that of the spiritual eye of the initiate, it is absolute light. How far we discern the light that shines in darkness depends upon our own powers of vision. There is neither spirit nor matter in reality, but only numberless aspects of the one hidden is, Sat. The homogeneous primordial element is simple and single only on the terrestrial plane of consciousness and sensation, since matter, after all, is nothing else than the sequence of our own states of consciousness, and the spirit, an idea of psychic intuition. Secret Doctrine 1. The power of any and all circumstances is a fixed, unvarying quality, but as we vary in our perception of this or reception of it, it appears to us as our difficulties vary in intensity. They do not at all. We are the variance. This one came from Letters That Have Helped Me, 135. Now, tell the public that now, even as of old, the genuine and sincere observer of life and its underlying phenomena, the intelligent co-worker with nature, may, by becoming an expert in her mysteries, thereby become a wise man, in the terrestrial sense of the word, but that never will a materialist wrench from nature any secret on a higher plane, and you will be laughed to scorn. Add that no wisdom from above descends on anyone save on the sine qua non condition of leaving at the threshold of the occult every atom of selfishness or desire for personal ends and benefit, and you will be speedily declared by your audience a candidate for the lunatic asylum. Nevertheless, this is an old, very old truism. Nature gives up her innermost secrets and imparts true wisdom only to him who seeks truth for its own sake and who craves for knowledge in order to confer benefits on others, not on his own unimportant personality. That is from Mr. Judge. Perhaps we should now open it up to theosophical questions, if you have any. I wanted to say one other thing. This came from Christina Rossetti's well-known line. She was a poet, English poet, contemporary with HPV. Does the road wind uphill all the way? Yes, to the very end. Does the journey take the whole long day? From morn to night, my friend. This sounds like an epitome of the life of those who are truly treading the path which leads to higher things. Whatever differences are to be found with the presentations of the esoteric doctrine, because in each era it takes on a different hue and texture, because it is given to different people in different areas, depending on the culture of the area. There is one agreement in all of them. The road to spiritual development. There is one inflexible rule binding all of the neophytes, regardless of age, space, and time. And this is the complete subjugation of the lower nature by the higher nature. And that path that we're searching for, it is stated that it is hard, it is painful, it is troublesome. We have to go through these things in order to get the spiritual insight. Wisdom was imparted to men, we're told, at the beginning of the cycle by the planetary spirit. So, this philosophy that is called the old wisdom was at the beginning given to humanity by the planetary spirit. So, remembering that, now we will open it for questions. Yes?
You talked about it being hard and painful, and I'm thinking about also many of the things you said. That I'm seeing a suggestion that while we're embodied, we can only really physically view this plane of existence that we're in now. There are some who can do it otherwise, like HPB. It said that someone came into the room, she recognized the master in the group. No one else recognized one. So obviously there's another plane of existence, and we need to capture that spiritually. And how do we do it?
Well, we just went through the stages. The first is to understand that such faculties the inner ones, exist. We live in a materialistic world, and our psychic nature or intellectual mind is attuned to that nature, okay? This is our home. But what did even Jesus say? Ye be separate. You come out and not be as the others are. Did he not say that? Yeah. So what we're here asked to do is that in order to go on this path which humanity is on towards a spirituality, we cannot do it with our physical senses. And these spiritual senses do not just automatically cultivate themselves. You have to make an effort for it. This is where we are, we said, the desire karma manasic principle, which is our intellectual mind. HPB says this is a necessary step humanity had to go through. But what has happened is that we have become enmeshed into it and we're not able to let go. We should have grown out of it during the fourth, not the fifth. This is the fifth root race. We should have gone, Atlantean race should have dealt with this, and we sank. As you know, we're all Atlanteans coming back to the Western world. Atlanteans sank. Why? Because they were exactly at this point of their psychic nature. Atlanteans are really us in that period of our evolutionary process. But what was it that we were doing? We were not doing the right thing back then, and we sank. But we, as a humanity of that period, did the wrong things, and HPV says that was when we have formulated the worst karma for ourselves, that we now must face and eradicate these things in ourselves. No one else is going to come to do it. So she did her work, her duty to humanity, by establishing a current towards Buddhi Manasic existence. It's not like we haven't been given help. We have been given help. But if you do not cultivate it in yourself, how do you cultivate it? We've been given all kinds of talks on this. A lot of people have talked about it. What did she say about, this is the Aquarian age. What kind of age is this? This is an age where humanity has to express compassion. What's compassion? Love for all. What is the concern of the planetary spirit? Its concern is for the whole. Whole. We, as a civilization, constitute one whole. Humanity is a whole. All of the nations make just different families within that whole. We are all one. We come from one essence, one light. Everything constitutes one. So if we think of ourselves as separate from everyone else, we're not going to go anywhere, because we aren't. We think we are, but we really are not. So altruism has to come into our natures, caring for the other, trying to do the right thing by our neighbors. If you remove one wheat from the neighbor's yard, double that amount is removed from your own, she tells us. These are not empty statements. We have to live it in order to understand it and to know it eventually. It cannot be done any other way. Theosophy, that old wisdom, is not words on paper. At first it is, but as we study it and learn it, let me find, she says something here that caught my eye. She says here, in too many cases, the members of the Theosophical movement content themselves with a somewhat superficial study of its books without making any real contribution to its active work. In other words, we have to learn it. but that is just the first step. Once you learn moral behavior, then you have to go out there and exhibit it. In other words, how would people see you as a human being on the outside of this philosophical room, for instance? Do you say it and you don't do it? Because they're not expecting great things from human beings at this stage. A smile, a kind word, a meal for someone who doesn't have the money to buy it for themselves. Those are the kinds of things that we have to cultivate. Mr. Judge says, if we do the small things of life as a duty every single day, in time our nature becomes broader, and then we are prepared to do the greater things that will come our way. But if we don't prepare for it, it will never come to pass. So altruism, what's the other part of it? Altruism, compassion, love, compassion. The highest form of love is compassion. And on this side, practical work, what's the other one? Paramitas. Paramitas are the virtues. She lists them in the voice of the silence, love and charity being the first. So Mr. Judge says if we don't love our neighbor, if we can not accept people into our heart, then we will never be able to get on the path, because that's the first rule, that that love be expressed in some form. But they also say that each human being associates themselves with those of like hearts and minds, because we are drawn to certain people and not others. But that's just natural. The point is, if the other side needs help, that you provide it regardless of whether you like them or not, is the key here. That liking, disliking should not make the decision for us as to who we're going to help and who we're going to keep out. Whoever needs it, needs it. And she says here, if the philosophy is to be a power for good in this and other lands, it can only bring about this result by the active cooperation of every one of its members. And we would earnestly appeal to each of them to consider carefully what possibilities of work are within his power, and then to earnestly set about carrying them into effect. Right thought is good, but thought alone does not count for much unless it is translated into action. There is not a single member who is not able to do something to aid the cause of truth and universal brotherhood. It only depends on his own will to make something an accomplished fact. And at the top of this is she says, in India, where she was at that time in Bombay, a homeopathic dispensary was established, and also mesmeric healing were offered for those who were in need of it. And she says that that is one thing that should be practiced by all centers. Well, I like to know which center has a homeopathic dispensary in this 21st century, and which one of us understands the botanical effects of plants and how to put them together in order to help the public, and who on earth knows mesmeric healing for the benefit of the other, not for money getting. Now, in these things, money getting cannot be established, because then it becomes a psychic effect and it is not a spiritual. She reiterates that. Now, we all have to make money to live with, but she says there is a point when you have to say this is enough, and this part is I'm contributing to the welfare of the whole. That's what she's talking about here. Not that we go with nothing. We have to eat, we have to live somewhere, we have to pay rent, and those things. So it's explicit. She understood what was going on, and she helped establish this homeopathic center. In the United States today, homeopathy is not accepted as a way of cure. And it is necessary for at least these students who come and listen to these talks to understand that that is necessary, because homeopathy goes to the cause of the disease, not the effect. The Western part treats the effect and does not ask any questions about the cause, because they don't know where it comes from. So, yeah. Yes?
Where could I look to expand upon? It looked like a catchphrase was the permutations of matter. Yeah.
On the physical plane,
Yes.
we said we have 7 different levels of constitution, did we not? 7. Our constitution is 7 levels. What's the first one? Physical. This is the visible. This is the only one that is visible. What's next? Astral. This is also called the design body. I'll just put B there, design body. It's the model that on which the physical is built in utero. Okay. It's electromagnetic. Okay, on the physical plane then, the form changes, does it not? We talked about boats, airplanes, but what is it made of? Same substances, right? So the permutation is that the form is changing, but not what makes the form. On these planes that are invisible, the real form exists, because if this wasn't there, you could not build anything on the physical. She called this noumena. I don't know how to spell it. Noumena. Oh.
N-O-U.
Thank you. Yeah. So, that's what she's talking about. If we go to these, noumenal plane is homogeneous. Sorry, can't spell today. Homogeneous. Homogeneous. What about this one? Hetero. Yeah. So there's multiplicity of form, but it's made of the substance that your eye can see it with. But its original plan, the design, is in the astral. If it wasn't there, she says, nothing on earth could be built, including our physical body. So that's what she's telling us to think about. We are playing with the physical substance and producing all these different things. But what is that doing to us? It only fulfills our psychic needs and our sense nature. It does not do anything to our inner nature, because we're not cultivating it by doing these things. So we are to say, this is enough. What I have is enough, and do that inner cultivation, which comes from a concentrated mind, we said, right? Yeah. And the Buddhi monastic nature is the one that needs to be opened up. And she gives in the Secret Doctrine as the gateway or port, pineal gland. We have to, it's dormant in most of humanity. It does what it needs to do, but it needs to be activated in order for us to have that inner facilitation. But it automatically opens up if we're doing the right things. This is the other end. Because a lot of people think that these gifts that come, like you see those, not cultivated, but munis holy men, mendicants, and people who are really hermetic, like you know them. They're quiet. They're very humble. Their nature is different than ordinary people. When you see them, you know that they have that other quality in them. It just is not visible to the eye, but nevertheless it comes out. They don't go after obtaining powers. They go after serving humanity to the best of their ability, and as they do that, those powers activate themselves. Yeah. So that's what she's talking about, getting a lot of people in her time even wanted to have powers, and she said that it's a good thing that we don't have the powers because we would misuse them, because some people are very intelligent and they would use it to gain power over others, and she said it's best that it's not cultivated that way, that we don't put people who are not capable of taking care of themselves alone, they're going to take care of humanity, is what she's getting at.
And even those are phenomenal experiences, right? When we talk about noumena, this student's understanding was that it's higher than astral. Astral is still a phenomenal plane.
It is?
So it needs to be even higher, you know.
They're all phenomenal because every one of them has a substance basis to it. As you grow to these, she tells you that buddhi has a pure part to it, but it has some part of it is also made of elemental lives, okay? But there is that light in it that nothing can touch because it's a spiritual. So when this light shines on the higher mind, that's when you know the real truth, because it goes directly to the inner aspect of whatever it is you're trying to figure out as to what it is, and it shows you. There's no previous to the post, in other words. It's there, and you look at it, and that's the truth. You know it. And that that's a very high state to accomplish. But nevertheless, if we don't make a simple effort to control the kama manasic mind, we will never be able to go any higher. Because if you don't invite the higher mind to come and help you, it is not of this world, as said many, many times before. It's a spiritual. It's part of the triad. This triad. Sorry, today is not my writing day. But it comes, eventually it comes. Yeah. This triangle. This is a spirit, which is Atma. This is Buddhi, which is a spiritual soul, or a spiritual discernment. And this is Manas, which is mind. And we know it works in two different ways, but we're not going to go into it. And so the higher mind is part of this essence here. It goes from life to life to life. Even though there's only one mind, it works in two different ways when we are in incarnation. Intellectual mind versus the spiritual mind. And in these statements, she's telling us to cultivate the spiritual mind. And the virtues, altruistic work, understanding philosophy, giving it to one other who is searching for the same truth as you are, is necessary on the path. If we don't actively participate in it, it cannot activate any of those powers in us either. And it's not a one-step thing, it takes time. So we have to live and do, and let nature do its own work. Well, thank you for joining us today. As I stated before, next week's talk is on the power of a vow. We hope you can join us then.